And so let's begin our session. Just to give you a bit more context and background here, like the two of us, Professor Moeini here and me, Haris, we co-teach a course on the philosophy of Marx at Habib. This is the second year in a running that we are teaching that course. So, and like for this session, we are basically in the same sort of mode as we are in teaching that course. So please, if bear with us a bit. But we are, since we are university professors, we are academics. So we've got a particular way of going about things, and which includes engagement with the text, like looking at texts carefully and reading texts and so on. So our the discussion today, the presentation that we have, is also going to be similarly a bit bookish. Let's say, like we are going to be talking about some lines and passages in the readings. In the reading, rather, that you only had one main reading that was given to you from the Grundrisse, and reading a bit around that section that was given to you. So, in terms of the structure of this session, as you've also read about it, I think that the first part of the session, the first few minutes, first 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes or so, is going to be dialectical. We'll have a dialogue with you on this line, on this quote that is there on the poster. Just us working together, trying to understand what this line might mean, what are the implications of this line. And then we are going to go into lecture mode, Moeini and I having a discussion on the problem of abstraction, which we've also outlined in the description that was given to you. So first having building some clarity on what the analysis of abstraction is and why it's important in Marx. And then we look at a series of passages in the Grundrisse that we've marked out to delineate, to clarify those, the analysis of abstraction and its various dimensions. So beginning with this line, this quote on the poster, if anything is certain, it is that I myself am not a Marxist, and this is a line that comes from Marx himself. It appears in a letter that was also given to you in the reading, a letter that he wrote to Lafrage, this French sociologist who also happened to be Marx's son-in-law. And now, what's the significance of Marx saying that he's not a Marxist? Because this might well be among the most important lines that one finds in Marx. But why is this line significant? What's the significance of Marx saying that? First and last, I'm not a Marxist. If there is anything that I can be certain about, is that I'm not a Marxist. So before we give you a bit of our take on this line, what do you think? What's the significance of this line? Any ideas?
Maybe it is an ideological state which one cannot explicitly do that.
Okay, that's an interesting response, as in ideology, or because ideology, now the term ideology has very particular kind of implications in Marx. Marx was known for having written the book German Ideology and known for his critique of but ideal as in a regulative principle. That's one way you could look at it. When you think about the term Marxism, let's phrase it in this way, now in our context, even in our socio-political context in Pakistan, both in Pakistan and globally, what comes to mind? Is what? Yeah, okay, yeah, you have that, yes.
May I?
Yeah, sure.
Would like the younger launch?
No, not it's that's not.
Well, that's a very interesting question. But before that, the question that you asked, I think you will have to explain. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. I think before anybody can answer that question, that Marx said that.
Yes.
That the certainty is that he's not a Marxist.
Yes.
You will have to kind of elucidate to the audience whether in his times, whether in his times, was the term to be a Marxist, was it in vogue? Did anybody knew that what Marxist is to be?
Okay. So let's then go and flesh out this line. So the thing is that Marx wrote this in the context of ongoing revolutionary political activity in Europe that really begins at the time of the French Revolution. And by the way, Marx is a critic of the French Revolution. Like Marx, he saw great potential in the French Revolution, but for him it was a liberal revolution, not really emancipatory, really in that respect. So here Marx is writing precisely in a time where there are revolutionaries in his own Europe, spread in different parts of Europe, including France, as well as Germany, and so on, who are describing themselves as Marxists. So Marxism was very much, so even in Marx's own time, Marxism had taken on a discursive formation. It had become a thing. And Marx was not very happy with the direction that Marxism was taking, and well, but what might have, so just to get to the point sort of quickly, one problem that Marx saw with Marxism was that it was doctrinal, it was dogmatic, like they had taken the name of Marx, they had taken.
And these concepts, they themselves are determined, are the product of the reality you try to understand. So you have this back and forth, you have this dialectical relationship between abstract and concrete, real world and world of notions and concepts, world of models and complex reality.
Yes, tendencies, it's like the tussle struggle between different kinds of abstraction. Also, Professor, we can talk a bit about how certain abstractions become realized, become a part of, become concrete. For instance, I think we can talk about the commodity form, how the commodity form as an abstraction emerges and then becomes realized at the concrete level. And that so already the analysis here in the 19th century is presenting pointing towards ways to understand societies where commodities are constantly in circulation, right? And that and you have an increased process intensification of the commodity form.
That is an example of tendency. Yes, there is a trend going on, and that is to commodify things at a rising speed. Yes, because if capitalism is supposed to become the dominant mode of production and exchange, things that used to be not commodities are supposed to be commodities, because otherwise you will not be able to exchange them in the marketplace. So you have to have this notion of commodity first, and then you build about that notion and turn things that were not commodities into commodities. So again, going back to our example of coronavirus or water, yes, which those of us who are a little bit older, like I myself, we remember that there was no water bottle 20 years ago. You wanted to drink.
It's an idea. It's an abstraction, and it's an abstraction that becomes
But if the abstract idea of commodity exists there, then you ask yourself, how can I commodify water? By putting it in a bottle, putting a label on it, and bringing it to the marketplace, get a patent, the copyright, claim the property rights, sell it for a profit. And then more and more other things which used to be not a commodity become commodity, like education, like healthcare. These days, a trip to the space, yes, maybe very soon a piece of land on Mars, yes. And it's not just a theoretical construct. Actually, it's something that we deal with it in our daily lives. Again, going back to this thing, coronavirus, as you know, people are very concerned even in the very developed parts of the world. Can they afford the medicine? If the medicine is developed, if it's brought to the market, can they afford the test? Can they afford hospitalization? Why that is the case? Because health services have already been commodified in certain parts of the world. And again, you need to understand it in an abstract way and ask yourself, what are the concrete determinations? The hospital system, the managerial system, the role of a state, the culture, the technology, the science, role of pharmaceuticals, competition between powers, China, United States, England, France, Saudi Arabia, Iran, culture, all these aspects actually hand in hand have shaped what we call it a healthcare system, yes? And health services have been commodified. So it helps if you try to understand it in an abstract way, go back and forth between the notion of commodity, which is an abstract concept, try to find an example, which is, the concrete example is health system, mainly in the United States, which is purely commodified, and then try to understand the process of evolution. As Dr. Harris said, these concepts have a history. They don't just fall from the sky. There is an interview with Michael Moore, this famous documentary producer. Actually, he produced a documentary about the health system. It's called Sicko, which is a funny name. And then in Sicko, he says that his grandparents, when they went to doctor, they didn't need to have a health insurance. They just paid in kind, like by a bag of rice or a couple of like animals, like a couple of chickens or a couple of sheep, and they paid it in kind, not in cash. So there has been an evolutionary process, and as a result of that evolutionary process, health services have become commodities. But it helps if you look back at the history of this process of evolution from a non-commodity to a commodity, and then the way people understand it. If you believe in market economy, which many people do, I would say for wrong reasons, yes, in a pure market economy as a dominant force, then you would say that, of course, this is the way forward. But if you try to think a little bit differently, you would ask yourself, what is the history of healthcare? How health services became commodity, yes? And then you would ask yourself, is it possible to think about a world in which health is not a commodity? Health services are not commodities. So this is actually, as we understand it, is the Marxian way of thinking about abstract and concrete, but not conclude at the very beginning that there will be a solid, carved into a stone answer to all these questions. That is why Marx said, I'm not a Marxist.
Yes, because in the realm of abstractions, which actually form our, like there is a battle that is underway. You see, so, you know, like making a final note about like what is it that makes Marx a revolutionary thinker is that because Marx is constantly working on this tension between like what is tendentially there, then what is being realized, like what should be realized. Like for instance, if we did not have this background abstraction, which Marx later on also goes on to call the general intellect when it comes to the development, like that technology would not develop if people were not working together, like in groups, collectively, right? But then, like, what happens historically with technology, the way Marx is analyzing, is studying, is that the general intellect is exploited, right? Like to serve certain kinds of class interests. But what would happen if those class interests, which are aimed towards the maximization or the maximum extraction of surplus value, if instead of that, if there is a real sort of class struggle that takes place, and if the general intellect is then employed to develop technology, to develop science for the benefit of the the greatest number of people in society, but that requires tussle, that requires struggle, it requires critique, it requires analysis, it requires, and the battle for Marx, like the most important battle is the battle at the intellectual level, because it's at the intellectuals, as thinkers, being in a constant process of starting with self-critique, like what do I believe in? Like what are my frameworks? Like how am I going, like thinking about things and so on? Have I already settled upon certain assumptions and beliefs? Or am I in a constant process of, self-examination and of self-critique? And so there is this battle underway, like whether it's determinate abstraction, whether it's thinking about tendencies, whether it's thinking about displacement or crises, that you've got to engage in that. Think about it as a battle of ideas, where if there are poor abstractions that abound, like how are you engaging those poor abstractions and sort of positing, bringing forth other abstractions which might counter what's already in place.
I started my talk by referring to a book which was just published. Actually, the translation was published, Participatory Economics. And, the idea is that workers are supposed to participate not only in the production processes, but also in managerial processes. And there should be a bottom-up process of exchange of ideas and information from the very, very bottom of the society all the way to the top. So keep that in mind. Then ask yourself, if that is the goal, what type of technology are we supposed to develop in order to enable workers to participate not only in production processes, but also in managerial processes? So, for example, you go to any workplace these days, there are cameras that are video recording us because they want to make sure that we enter on time, we exit on time, we have to punch in, punch out, scan in, scan out. So this is a mean of control, yes, which has its own virtues, of course. It's there to guarantee that workers are going to work efficiently, as efficient as possible. What if efficiency is not the only goal? What if participation or a more humane way of working is the goal? Do we need video cameras to video record workers if participation is the goal? Do we need to force them to record them to scan in, scan out, punch in, punch out? Or do we need different types of technology? I don't know the answer. I don't know the exact answer, in the sense that I don't know what type of technology would enable workers to participate not only in production processes, but also in managerial processes. But we can imagine a world wherein workers are the bosses, bosses are the workers, so they work in two capacities, and technology has been redefined and reshaped and redevised in such a way that such participatory way of work has become a possibility. And that is exactly this dialectical relation between world of ideas world of abstracts and world of concretes, world of material, hardcore realities. And of course, they shape each other because once you switch from the existing mode of production, which is basically top-down, you have a board on the top, you have the CEO, you have the higher-level managers, you have the middle-level managers, you have the supervisors, you have the foremen, you have the workers. Once you move to an alternative mode of production, then it would give you time and space and incentive and resources to think about alternative technologies. So it starts with an idea, but it's not just an idea. It's also the way reality would force you to rethink your ideas and you reshape them and redefine them. And the way, then in the next round, reality will be reshaped and redefined, and the concretes become new concretes as a result of these changes in the world of ideas.
Okay, so Ms. Shumaila has been, like she's telling us that you have, so Q&A, Q&A, and then, and the thing is that your questions, for those of you who are coming in, having done the reading, like any question that you have about the text, we would of course be happy to, if you have specific passages that you marked out, like you have questions on the reading, that would be good. Like if you have questions, because one of the motives, one of the aims of our session with you was to sort of, inspire you to sort of read Marx on your own, because that's another way in which like you depart from Marxism, because there are of course like you can go around certainly identify as Marxist and so on and never read a page of Marx, But when you actually start reading Marx, that's when you realize that, hey, like there is something going on over here which might be very deep, rich, interesting, irrespective of what your field of work is. So, like, yes.
May I?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, the confession that is not from the reading. It's from the brilliant lecture that both of you have given. You have thrown many ideas which instill many thoughts and inspire for reading. For example, price and value. And then you see the Communist Manifesto and Engels and Marx somewhere. And then someone said Russia. And, so abstraction, as you said, the abstraction of ideas. Right. The question is that the epitome of capitalism, if you say United States of America, the labor movement, AFL-CIOs, where they have taken their labor and they have put the value of labor, which substantially supports a middle-class labor family to sustain. Although we, in our little understanding, take it as an antithesis of what Marx said, rightly or wrongly, but we presume that, you know where I'm taking you. As compared to countries like Pakistan, where Professor Moeini said, and very rightly said, the colonial history, the colonial mindset, where when we put a number to our, a value to our labor, for example, say, let me be concrete, say recently 14,000 rupees is a monthly wage of a minimum labor.
Yes.
That does not give us sustenance to a family of 4 or 3 in a Pakistan price value index. The question I'm asking is that United States of America, being the antithesis or antichrist of whole Marxism, has eventually reached through their labor movements a point where there substantially supports and blossoms those labor movements. Whereas the colonial countries like Pakistan, in their post-colonial era, have been reeling behind, and still we are there to shout our slogans against Marxism and against capitalism both. So the question is, as a professor, as a learned people of thought processes, how do you see these issues being resolved in countries, especially like Pakistan. Have I made myself clear, or have I?
I mean, like that's a very deep and complex question, and it's a question which encapsulates within it so many different questions. Because before coming in, Professor Moeini and I were we thought that we would just keep it totally bookish and just do the Grundrisse and this thing, and especially not answer any questions about Pakistan, since this is going live on Facebook. But thinking in terms of this dialectic of abstraction and concreteness, here is what you would do. Like you would say that, okay, I'm using the term or the idea of colonialism, of post-coloniality in my discourse. What might these terms mean? And if colonialism, and it is indeed, a process which is unfolding in history, and because again, colonialism is not a legacy of the past. And precisely if you're thinking in terms of abstraction and concreteness, you would say that, well, colonialism also is like this big abstraction which remains with us, which remains. And so might we consider the United States also to be a post-colonial society? You see, because that's another, because you were saying Pakistan is post-colonial and then United States. I mean, because colonialism also leaves behind a rather, global legacy. Then thinking in terms of abstraction and concreteness, you could be looking at both of these, whether it's American society, Pakistani society, what is it that makes, so let's say you take up the problem of poverty. Why is there more poverty in Pakistan and less in the United States, in your estimation, like the way you were, even though that also might require some further, analysis, and but you'll see, sir, very soon that once you genuinely start thinking about this category of poverty in terms of this dialectic of abstraction and concreteness, you would say that, well, poverty in Pakistan is enmeshed in a host of abstractions, right, which make Pakistan what it is. And, you might be led in certain directions, thinking about where the productive capacity might be in this society, and then where the surplus value is being extracted, and how exploitation, alienation takes place within the fabric of this society. I think, but I think he'll answer the question about America. Sure, please.
So I wouldn't romanticize the state of working class in America. In past almost 40 years, real wages have remained constant, despite dramatic rise in productivity in the United States. It's an immensely productive society. All these technologies, most of them are coming from over there. But just pay a visit to your Facebook or go to YouTube, and there are so many videos about rising number of homeless people in the most advanced county in the United States, that is Silicon Valley. And actually that has caused an issue for these great universities such as Stanford and Berkeley, which are there because now you have parents coming to visit the campus, and there are lines and lines of homeless people living on both sides. But the question is, what happened? Well, one of the things that happened before wages stopped rising was that workers and the employers sat at a table and negotiated with each other a deal, which later became known as the New Deal, according to which workers agreed not to go on a strike, not to destroy the machinery, and capital, the employer, agreed to pay good wages. And government agreed to play the role of referee, yes? So there was this political dialogue between these three extremely important forces: the state, capital, and labor. But why wages stopped rising, that's a whole other story. But going back to our discussion of abstract and concrete, it's very interesting that majority of American workers or maybe a good number of them, don't think in terms of these concepts that we are talking about. For them, work is an individual duty, yes? So if you are not earning enough money, of course, it's because you are not a hard-working person, and it's because the culture for many, many decades has tried, and I would say successfully tried, to sell them the idea that it's all about individual choice, individual hardworking, individual dedication. It's not about structure, it's not about class, it's not about forces that are above and beyond individual choice. And then when you raise conscious about, well, look around you, open your eyes. You are working 2 jobs, 3 jobs, 50 hours a week, 70 hours a week, sometimes more, sometimes a little bit less. Still, you cannot make your ends meet. So, what is the reason? And then by raising that consciousness,
like right, and when he wrote that book, he came into a great deal of like opposition with very many different theorists, both Marxists as well as other theorists, going after Derrida and so on and so forth, because that was the book in which Marx developed his understanding of ontology, which he described as hauntology. Not ontology, hauntology. So where he's saying that, okay, I read Marx, and what I find in Marx are ghosts and specters, right? So what are specters? Specter is a form of abstraction, right? So when you read the books of Marx, where he's talking about, like for instance, this book that we were also covering in class just before the break, the German ideology. That the phantom of past generations weighs on a nightmare, like on the brains of the living. So what are these phantoms? Like these phantoms are what? Like, ideas, notions, perceptions, beliefs, ideologies, like, which we inherit, which are there in our background, which are there in our social, political, cultural milieu, and that, and they go on to shape our concrete reality. So it's precisely about, so to get real is to engage abstractions, right? And then to generate your own abstraction. So to generate abstraction in that sense is to generate theory, is to generate, like ideas which can challenge the abstractions that prevail, that dominate. But now, like, if we can actually, we'll come to your question in just a second, because there is so much ground to cover. So the second dimension of abstraction that we wanted to highlight is Marx's emphasis on tendency. That there are tendencies. Like for instance, there were so many passages which we gave you to read, but if you can just focus a bit on this one on page 103. Like, we don't quite have time to read all of it, but I mean, like here, Marx is talking about exchange value. Exchange value as a particular kind of, like, let's say, category, right, in economics, and how exchange value is tendentially present, right, with different intensities at different moments in history. Because for Marx, what really is behind historical change, is behind a historical transformation, is tendency, right? At the level of abstraction, and Professor Moeini can also, So here, this is a passage on exchange value. There are other passages in Marx elsewhere in the introduction where he's talking about production, exchange, distribution, consumption. Right? Like in terms of tendencies, like how in different societies at different historical eras, different periods, and different modes of production, like you have these tendencies operating differently. So,
you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I think. I just wanted an elaboration on the concept of the concrete and the abstract. What I understand from the lecture is that accumulation of many abstractions or abstract leads to a concrete. So that concrete does it remain solidified, or with the new abstraction, some of those abstractions are extracted out, and with every time, with evolution of mind and times, a new concrete is generated and some of the abstract is thrown out, or it's just an accumulation of more and more concrete into a new abstraction?
Okay,
and
brilliant.
So
brilliant question. You see, for Marx, analysis of abstraction is important because it helps you understand reality, which is dynamic, because this is a philosopher like for whom reality is not static. It's in a constant process of change and transformation. So, and this is another reason why Marx is not a Marxist, because he's opening all of his works to critique in relation to what might be happening in the political economy of your time. Right, so it's so this precisely is a way of thinking, a mode of analysis for a world, for a reality which is in a constant state of change and transformation. However, to say that reality changes doesn't mean that nothing from the past stays in the present, because there are all kinds of tendencies. Even this thing, this monstrous term called communism, which Marx certainly talks about, like in the Grundrisse and so on. I mean, like communism is also a vestige of history, like the very notion, like communism as an abstraction, different conceptions, different frameworks for understanding communism, and we carry it in the present, right? So the past is not another country, right? Like per se, the abstractions, the tendencies that were there in society where there were different, like let's say, ideas battling against each other, battling. Like for instance, when you actually go on to read the Grundrisse, hopefully, like when he gives you a history of modes of production, like one of the modes of production he describes is the feudal mode of production, which precedes the industrial. Now, now when you look at contemporary society, whether it's Pakistan or elsewhere in the world, the feudal as a mode of production also, like it's still there, like as an abstraction. It's certainly like there are like these days there are theorists, some theorists coming out of the Marx field who use the term platform feudalism, to talk about Google and to talk about Apple and to talk about Microsoft, as to how, like you've got these massive conglomerates, these companies that have become like, that have set up their own sort of, feudal domain, right? So like reality is in a constant process of change and transformation, but change doesn't mean necessary progress. Change doesn't mean that abstractions that were there in the past have simply been wiped away, like they continue to manifest, like they continue to appear in the present, like the failure of various kinds of socialist movements, which Marx was seeing all around him, even in his old life. Like he was saying that the problem with these people is that they don't seem to understand that, like, we are not making linear progress in time, as in, since we've moved forward in time, we've necessarily gotten away from some of the poor abstractions which might be, preventing us from creating genuinely just or emancipatory society. Yes.
It helps if we pause for a moment and try to think about the relation between Marx and Hegel, and the fact that Marx was a student of Hegel, not in the sense that he sat in Hegel's classes, but in the sense that he read Hegel very carefully and then tried to use the Hegelian logic and turn Hegel on his head, as we all know, famously said. So, what is what is the relationship? So in Hegel, you have a mind and you have a matter. And mind wants to understand the matter, and while understanding the matter, understanding itself, it evolves. And there's a historical process of the evolution of mind. So in Marx, it's not just mind trying to understand the matter. It's a very dialectical relation between mind and the matter, in the sense that changes in the matter shapes and reshape and define and redefine the way mind works, and vice versa. So of course there will be some extraction, as you put it, from the concrete. Yes? But it's a historical process. It depends on the way mind and the matter actually interact with each other. So I can give you a very, very personal example. I was talking to a friend today who was arguing that, a friend from overseas, was arguing that the only way forward for our societies is to completely follow the Western model. Let's borrow the Western institutions, like democracy, constitutional democracy, rule of law, individualism, and the like. And then I was telling him that when you live in Pakistan and when you look at around you and you learn about the history of colonialism and post-colonialism, you completely understand the process of economic development differently. Because now you're experiencing something new for me as a foreigner, yes? I'm coming from a country which doesn't have an official history of colonialism. It doesn't mean that the country was not in practice colonized or was not subject to colonial forces or foreign intervention. But it makes a huge difference when you experience the reality on the ground and you try to understand it and shape ideas and theories and concepts which you hope you would find useful in understanding this very complex notion of post-colonial society. And then you start producing concepts and theories and starting a conversation with people surrounding you, and then change their minds about what it means to be developed, what it means to progress, what it means to be advanced society, what it means to be a liberal society or democratic society. So there is this ongoing interaction between the reality on the ground and the world of ideas. And it's an ongoing process. And of course, if you are successful, you would try to change it, but there is no guarantee. That's why Marx, this is my understanding, that's why Marx said, I'm not a Marxist, because he didn't want to give a blank check. That as soon as you understood, you came up with a theory, you can make desirable social changes. Because while you are trying to make desirable social changes, society changes. So you're not dealing with the same object that you started analyzing when you started your analysis. So it's all about this back and forth, using more contemporary language, between theory and reality, between mind and the matter. And the matter here is not the physical matter, it's the social matter, yes? All these very concrete, solid social relations that are resistant to change. And we try to understand them, and because there are many of them, and because the web is so complex, you have to abstract. But when you abstract, your abstraction, of course, is going to be affected by the complexity of the real world, and vice versa. So that is why, and this is actually, I think, what we are trying to articulate, and Dr. Harris would explain more. That is why we believe that Marx argued that he was not a Marxist. Because of this very dialectical relationship between mind and the matter.
So the thing is that in the text that was given to you, when you move to the discussion on pages 104, 105, Marx is talking about labor. Now, what is labor? Like how do you understand labor? For instance, 30 minutes left. Okay. How does this? How could labor both have an abstract and a concrete dimension to it?
Physical worker is a labor.
Physical work. So you see, like when you look at some of the passages here on 104, 105, like Marx is introducing here, like actually for the first time, his notion of abstract labor. So abstract labor is what is commodified when capitalism as a political economy, as it moves forward. Even in the 19th century, Marx is thinking about that. Because usually when we think about labor, labor, so like let's say you think about thinking concretely about, what labor is, right? Now for Marx to think concretely about labor is to think about the distinction between abstract and concrete labor. So concrete labor is the work that you do, like the work that you do, the work that you produce. Like abstract labor is the capacity that you have for producing work, and it's that capacity which is commodified, which is, right? You see, so here labor, to think about labor concretely is to think about the development of this abstraction, where you have concrete labor, then you have abstract labor. It's abstract labor that is commodified, right? That's like the other thing, thinking about the tendential dimension of abstraction is to look at the analysis of value, which Marx is also presenting in the Grundrisse. Now, what is value? How do you understand value? And where does value live? Where does value reside? Value is what?
Price,
exchangeable, okay.
Price is exchangeable.
Value is not exchangeable, okay. Yeah, sure.
So when you talk about value, it's also very subjective to the kind of community you live in and the greater value of things. But it's also exchangeable, as the reading says. But exchangeable in a certain power dynamic, like for the richest of for the common folk, of what's perceived to be the richest or the poor. Not the poor, the richest, from the reading.
Okay. Other responses, the category of value, what does it mean?
It decides
exchangeability.
What we pay is price, what we get is value.
Okay, yes.
Marx and Capital, I think, defines it also as satisfaction derived by utility.
Satisfaction. Okay, so there's one thing that I'm going to say about value, and that Professor Moeini would give the economic analysis. You see, for Marx, value is a whole sort of social fabric. It's the analysis of value at the most general level has to begin with the idea as to, how did we end up living in a society where everything has monetary value attached to it, where everything has exchange value, where everything is calculable, precisely in terms of price and value, right? So value becomes also a fabric. It becomes a whole structure, which then envelops, which then transforms, has an impact. You could say good impact, negative impact, whatever, but on our social relations, on our relations with other people, on the relation that we then go on to form with nature, with the ecosystem, where ecology, where Marx is wondering in the Grundrisse, what kind of abstraction is at work, is at play, where everything in the ecosystem is seen precisely in value terms, what is the value that can be extracted from this? And before looking further at the analysis of value, let's say, given the shortage of time, last dimension of abstraction that we'll clarify is that abstraction as a totality is also turning in on itself, is going, so you have the phenomena of displacement that takes place. So for instance, here in the Grundrisse, Marx is thinking about why the political economy is afflicted with crisis. And we are currently, in fact, living through that, a crisis. How is it that you've got capital at the most general level, right? As a totality,
moving from one crisis to the other, going through cycles of boom and bust, like these days, as you know, sitting in Karachi today, I think for the third or fourth time this week, the stock market was shut down because it was losing precisely so much value, right? Like in one day. So the analysis of abstraction, and this is where, going to Professor Moeini's point about Hegel, that Marx is adopting aspects of Hegel's philosophy also, where to think dialectically is to think in terms of identity and difference, to think in terms of totality and the antagonism to that totality. So how is it that capital might be self-destructive, might be, like moving against itself, like how it displaces itself, and so on. So, yes.
The classic example of value is that you go to a marketplace, to a bazaar, as we call it here in this part of the world, and you have a little bit of money in your pocket, and you can exchange it for anything which is worth that money, yes, regardless of what that anything is, whether it's a piece of bread or is half a kilo of rice or a bag of salt, yes? So there is this notion of diversity here, that you're dealing with a diverse list of or set of commodities, but you can exchange them for an abstract concept which is money. So you have this coexistence of two concepts actually, the concept of an abstract concept of money, and then a concrete concepts of bread or rice or salt. And then the question is, how is it possible that in a world of such diversity, the exchange takes place? What is the common denominator? So Marx's analysis is that there is a common denominator, and that common denominator is value. All these commodities that we exchange for each other through the medium of money, they have value. So then the question arises, what is value? And then this is actually when Marx provides us with a very brilliant analysis. Value is socially necessary abstract labor time. So the source of value is labor that we perform. But then the question is, well, when you look at around you, people are capable of doing various forms of labor. I'm a teacher, I cannot fix an engine. But a mechanic may not be able to teach economics. A doctor can cure diseases, but he or she may not be able to paint a wall. But despite all these differences, we are still able to enter relation of exchange with each other. So there must be a common denominator, and that common denominator must be abstract. Because if it's not abstract, then the exchange will not be possible. So it's a very interesting way of thinking about this dialectical relation between abstract and concrete, and the way they feed into each other. So you start with from a list of concrete things, and then you abstract them. I'm using a non-Marxian language, which I hope is more, let's say, contemporary, and that is the language of common denominator. And then by focusing on these common denominators, you go back and explain the concrete, which is the exchange of rice for salt, salt for bread, bread for whatever you exchange it for. So this is actually an example of how Marx analyzes complex social relations such as relation of exchange and other relations. So there is a back and forth between mind and the matter. Because in order to understand exchange, first of all, you have to have a notion of exchange. So you have to start with an abstract concept. You have to shape a concept in your mind. And then that concept that you shape in your mind, of course, is going to be determined by the reality you go and try to understand. But when you go and try to understand the reality, you need a tool. That tool is that toolbox that you need to carry with you to understand reality is a bunch of concepts, which is extremely complex. And you need a method to decipher all these complexities, and Marx actually provides that method. And that is actually, Dr. Horace explained at the very beginning, that Marx provides us with a method of understanding this very complex thing we call society.
Right, so, building up on this analysis that Professor Moeini has given, you see, just yesterday when we were preparing, when we were thinking about this session, Moeini and I were looking at multiple interpretations of precisely these passages where there are, thinkers, scholars who work in the field of Marxism, broadly defined, who would continue to assert that it's not abstraction that we begin with, rather it's the concrete that we begin with, right? And that's, but Marx is here emphasizing the importance of beginning with abstraction, right? Because it's abstraction which leads you into concreteness. But so you see, for Marx, we've got to have this view of reality, where reality, Professor Moeini was just giving examples of devices which we hold in our hands, like these material, but these material devices are absolutely, suffused in a web of abstractions of different kinds, including social perception. It's also, we are living in a time where, through your cell phone as a user, you log into platforms which are global in scale, right? Whether it's the Google platform or whether it's the Facebook platform, and that within the platforms, there is a battle going on between platforms and states, a battle for sovereignty. So which means that, again, that the cell phone is not just a cell phone. It's not just, it's that certainly a material device, but it's a material device which is enmeshed in a web of abstractions. And it also includes, that abstraction includes ideas that are there about, extracting mineral resources to actually construct the device, which also then is tangled up with processes of exploitation and so on, right? So you have a multiplicity, a plurality of abstractions which make your concrete reality what it is, right? That's yes.
When you say there are so many platforms now, such as social media, so isn't everyone just getting their own information, which is now changed from what it used to be? Because at now since everyone's getting their own information and they are getting different types of content, you mentioned individualism. Marx did not believe in individualism. Now, doesn't that mean that now there are such individuals, because everyone's getting different information opposed to what they would be getting? Because then there's no layers, and then there's not a simple straight structure, like everybody's getting the same information. There's only one channel and everybody's on the same platform. Now, since there are so many different platforms such as Google, Facebook, Instagram, and there's so many pages that who are giving off different information, aren't we consuming different stuff, which makes us more as individuals rather than just one big group? I'm sorry, I rambled on too long, I think.
Okay. Actually, it's an interesting question because of a battle of analysis that's going on within social sciences. Dr. Horace talked about one mode of analysis, which is actually the Marxian one as we understand it, and he made a reference to this fictional character, Robinson Crusoe, which is an iconic character in the alternative theory, which is the mainstream theory, which is in the non-Marxian theory. So the analysis goes on something like this, that there is a guy who lives in an island alone, and there is nobody else, so because there is nobody else around, he cannot enter social relations. There is no social relation because he's alone. But he has access to forces of nature. He can go and fish, he can cut trees, he can make fire. And then, if you want to understand how society works, just study the behavior of that individual guy who lives in an island alone, and then extend it to the society. And what is the society? The mathematical sum total of these individuals, without any concern for social relations. So using this contrast, going back to your question, are we really an individual? When I use my iPhone, it seems that I'm using it as an individual, yes? It's my property, I purchased it 5 years ago, and I have the SIM card, I carry it in my pocket, but actually it's part of a very, very interesting and very complex social web of relations, or web of social relations, yes? For example, the data that I generate, there is a reason I generate that data, because there are certain needs that have been imposed upon me. I cannot, when I say I mean generally speaking as a typical person, we cannot live without having access to internet anymore. So this need has been imposed upon us. So we have been forced to enter a certain type of social relations. And once you enter these social relations, necessarily you will be forced to generate data which will be collected at the other end by these platforms. And of course, there is a war, there is a battle over who should have access, how much information, and who should be able to do what with the data the platform, the company collects.
So you see, I mean, like we are still talking about abstraction, you know, like at the level of the background conditions within a society. So your question, like the question itself, because you asked the question, and your question rests upon an assumption which is, I think, commonly shared, that Marx is against individualism. Like that's the assumption which really. Yeah, but the thing about that was not the discussion at all. But I'm using your question precisely to explain why the analysis of abstraction is important, right? So if you have a society where the mere mention of Marx, you know, there was someone sitting here, he's stepped out, where you think about Marx and you think about the failure of the Soviet experiment, you know, or you think about Marx, you think about, you know, China as a communist society, like failing to prevent coronavirus, although, you know, like there is all kinds of evidence coming out showing that that's not the case. So like, you know, now that in itself is the first step in the direction towards the analysis of abstraction. That, well, okay, here is my social reality. Here is what's happening over here. Like the concrete, like this is my reality in its full concreteness. That this is what people believe in. Here are the kinds of assumptions that they carry. Here is how like Marxist theory is being produced or understood or misunderstood. Here is how Marx has been appropriated in the society, or being read, not being read. Like you see, so that's. But you know, moving on in our discussion, there was another question. Yes.
So, from what you have discussed so far, am I right to conclude that this idea of abstraction is solely based on inductive argumentation, inductive reasoning, and that takes into account the various ideas, perspectives, and discourses, and does not necessarily does not have to be the reality?
Well, I mean, let me take the first part of your, because second part, because we are talking about sort of, you know, reality, but then the analysis of abstraction helps you think about reality in, like, you know, like helps you understand what reality might be. But on the question of induction, actually,
when we think about logic, like we usually split, like logic into inductive logic and deductive logic, that you either have inductive arguments or you have deductive arguments and so on. I mean, like here in Marx, he's not quite operating with that kind of dichotomy or division between induction and, however, he is deeply committed to the notion of validity, that you've got to make arguments, precisely arguments which are valid arguments. But now, let's say when you take standard deductive logic and you take up the definition of validity, like what kind of argument is a valid argument is an argument in which you set out some premises, and if the conclusion follows necessarily from the premises, the argument would be a valid argument. That it doesn't quite work out that way in Marx, because in Marx, an argument that you're making about reality, about ideas, it could be about politics, it could be about economics, it could be an argument that you're making about matters philosophical. But an argument is a valid argument if it gives you this dialectic of the abstract and the concrete. That's an argument which is a valid argument in Marx. And it's deductively valid. It's deductively valid if you're working in this dialectic of abstract. And again, like the second part of your question about reality, because that's precisely the thing here, that in Marx, what is real, like what is concrete, is saturated with abstractions. Like the philosopher Jacques Derrida, 20th century, famous philosopher known for deconstruction, like deconstruction as a methodology, wrote this book on Marx called The Spectres of Marx. What do you think abstraction might be?
Or let me put it slightly differently. Those of you who are coming from a science background, what is your understanding of abstraction in contemporary sciences?
Abstract means when we summarize the whole of the text within few lines.
That's certainly, like one way one could. So now, let me take a shot at clarifying, the analysis of. So abstraction, you see, for Marx, is both a methodology as well as a process. So first, let's think about abstraction, not in terms of methodology, but as a process which is underway in society, which might be underway in history. So now, before any kind of thinking is possible in any field whatsoever, like whether it's math, whether it's physics, whether it's the sciences, whether you're just thinking about what's happening with the coronavirus, what's happening in politics, and so on and so forth, there is a whole sort of background, a social political background, what you would call your context, what you would call milieu, in which there is a certain kind of thinking already underway about that problem, right? So if you are, like for instance, if you want to understand what might happen with the coronavirus or with the corona epidemic in Pakistan, before going on to think about that specific, so if like that category or that problem, if you are following the analysis or the argument that Marx presents here in the Grundrisse, you've got to figure out what kind of thinking prevails in the society. So it's that thinking which precedes your own thought at an individual level, right? Which you can understand as abstraction. Abstraction, so at that level, abstraction is the background, right, for all kinds of thought processes to take place, right? So, which may lead to, so the thing is that, so synthesis is what you'll need to bring about. Synthesis is what you'll need to bring about as you, so for instance, you know, some of the assumptions that we might carry about Marx was that Marx was very deeply worried about poverty. Well, he certainly was worried about poverty, or he's worried about, you know, the problem of unemployment, or so on. I mean, certainly he's, but if you look at this book that you've been given to read, where does the book begin? The book begins, like the first line in the Grundrisse, that like Marx is talking about production. You know, like production is the most sort of, you know, general, he begins with the most general, sort of, you know, and what is production? Like production at the most general level, sort of, you know, defines, so he defines society as a mode of production. So what is it that this society produces, right? So instead of beginning with some specific sort of, you know, problem that, hey, let's talk about poverty, or let's talk about unemployment, or let's, like for Marx, if you're thinking in terms of abstraction, and for Marx, like one has got to sort of, you know, first think abstraction and then move to concreteness, and we'll come to that in a minute. But to think abstraction is to think about, not at the level of your own synthesis or methodology, but to think about, you know, like what kind of thought is available in a given, you know, social political context. Like what's going on in the world of ideas? Like what kind of perceptions? And here you could be, you know, thinking about religious ideas, thinking about, you know, like cultural forms, and you're also very aware of how this world of thought in which you're enmeshed also affects your own perception, also affects your own thinking, right? So the first thing one can say about abstraction is that you think about the background in which any kind of thinking is going to take place. Right? That's one thing to, you know, carry. Yes.
So speaking of coronavirus, I read on the internet that a person who was very concerned about, of course, her survival, asked a very interesting question: where is the society? Because she seemed to be so helpless. She was asking a very existential question: that where is the society that is supposed to support me, to save me? So let's think about the concept of society as an abstraction. What it means to say society is an abstract concept. What is society?
What can do society with the virus?
Well, we are pretty much all vulnerable to this virus, yes? So we are looking for some help. Where is the help is supposed to come from? Is it supposed to come from a state, community, society, our health system, our parents, the religious authority? All of these can be approached as abstract concepts. The question is not why she was asking about society. The question is why society is an abstract concept. Yes?
Is it because society mainly is based on social relationships, you know, relationship with other human beings, of human beings. So that idea of
Okay, that's brilliant. Okay, so that's the next part of the discussion, because you see, Marx is a philosopher or a thinker of relations. Like when you're thinking about society, like when you're thinking about subjective, like let's take the notion of subject, like when we usually think about subjectivity, we are thinking about the subjectivity of an individual, right? But for Marx, there is no such thing as the individual, because I'm glad you brought this up about social, because the individual is in fact one of the really poor abstractions which prevail, right? And because individualism is one of the abstractions which Marx sort of, you know, argues might be a poor abstraction in what is known as mainstream political economy, right? Where you're talking about individual desires and individual needs and individual greed and desire for gain and material wealth and so on and so forth. It's what he calls the Robinson Crusoe phenomena, right? In contemporary, like for Marx, there is no such thing as an individual, right? And the thing is that we live our life in a bundle of relations. It's like social relation, and the relations are not just relations between people, because the people are also enmeshed in a whole web of subjectivity, which actually constitutes this the background abstraction in which we are living, in which we are thinking, we are, right? Like, are you seeing the point? So it's relational, like, you know. So if you have, you know, if you have a society in which people give various kinds of, you know, explanations for why there is coronavirus, like you're thinking about what's going to happen with coronavirus in that society has to begin with that, you know, like what's going on. What's going on in the fabric of relations within that society. Now taking one step further, you know, like having clarified, or like working to clarify this notion of what you would call background, it also comes from, you know, if you look at the history of philosophy, like you can take up the idea of worldview, you know, worldview, which is also not individual, it's shared, or you take up the notion, I think he would, Josefa, who's in my class currently, just walked in, like Habermas's idea of the life world, which is also like this, you know, like the shared background of, you know, beliefs and like historically inherited. Once you go past that, like the second dimension of abstraction here, and this is what makes Marx a revolutionary thinker, is to like look at the power of abstraction to challenge prevailing forms of knowledge, you know, prevailing sort of, you know, perspectives, ideas, or the other abstractions that. So the thing is that like there are abstractions which are poor abstractions, then there are abstractions which are good abstractions. For Marx, there is no intellectual life. There is no analysis without abstraction, right? So to think in terms of what, like he calls determinate abstraction, is to think about abstractions which can be created like at the level of the subject, not the individual, at the level of the subject, because you're also trying to, you know, form certain kinds of subjects which challenge the prevailing abstractions, so that's the say. And in line with that idea, we would like to draw your attention, you know, like in the reading that you had for today, in a couple of passages, and I'm sure like those of you who went through the reading might already have questions on these passages, but there is this very interesting discussion that begins on page 101, which can you know, help us understand. So we can start by looking at just one line over here. This is on page 101, right at the top of this page, that the concrete is concrete because it is the concentration of many determinations, hence unity of the diverse. It appears in the process of thinking, therefore, as a process of concentration as a result, not as a point of departure, even though it is the point of departure in reality, and hence also the point of departure for observation. But let's drop all of that. Let's just focus on that the concrete. So we've been talking about abstraction, but the thing is that what one needs to learn is this dialectic of the abstract and the concrete. So now what does it mean for Marx to say that the concrete is concrete because it is the concentration of many determinations, hence unity of the diverse? Yes.
Are you asking something?
Yeah.
Is it a question?
Yeah. So give us a response and then we'll.
It's probably not correct, but I'll just let me go ahead. So like, could it be like, you know, when he says moving from a diverse option, moving from a diverse like, you know, position to a more concrete one, maybe he's talking about bringing it to a more conclusive idea, okay, or trying to connect everything into like, you know, one conclusive idea.
Okay, very, very interesting response. It's like other responses.
The concrete is concrete because it is the concentration of many. So now if we are describing abstraction as the background which precedes any kind of thinking, like you can't think unless there is this background within it. And so then what is the concrete? You see, because this is where like Marx is a materialist thinker that like he's known as like dialectical materialism, and is one of these major theoretical themes associated with, but like to understand how Marx was in critical dialogue with other materialists of his time, like you could unpack this line, because for Marx, like the concrete is the concrete, right? Why? Because it is constituted by ideas. Yeah, because the thing is that like usually when we think about materialism, that hey, like be materialist, like let's drop idealism. Like how do we usually understand materialism? That to be a materialist is to work with matter, right? Work with like material reality. But yeah. But for Marx, this material reality is what it is because it is through and through saturated, suffused by abstractions. So that's one thing, like if you're thinking about, determinate abstraction, right? Here that your material reality, like what you would call here, and which is why he's not using the term material, he's talking about concrete, like that your reality is concrete. It is the way it is because it is the unity of a multiplicity of determinations, right? And as we take this discussion forward, right, like the second dimension of this analysis of abstraction is that within this reality of ours, which is through and through suffused with abstractions, you have tendencies, tendencies. So to talk about a tendency is to say that you're talking about, like, let's say, a trend or a move which has not yet reached realization, but it's there at the level of tendency. So certain tendencies become, concretely realized. Like there are other tendencies which remain only at the tendential level, but which is not to say that they are not there, right, in the first place.
So my favorite example is the example of technology. Think about this microphone, yes? Why this is the site of many, many determinations? What are the aspects of this microphone that determines it as a microphone, as a useful object for communicating with the audience? Well, it has a design, yes? And somebody designed it. It's not a wireless. So there is an idea of a non-wireless microphone. And somebody invested in producing this microphone, so there is a financial aspect to it. Somebody's brought it to the market, so there is a transportation aspect. Somebody sold it for profit, so there is a profit motive aspect. And the list goes on. But you can think about it as a very abstract concept, a concept of a microphone which is useful for speaking to and recording your voice and connecting to the loudspeaker. And other examples can be given, again, for example, society. What determines a society? The population, the class, the race, the racial groups, the gender groups, the average age of the population, the history of the population. For example, Pakistan has a history, yes. You cannot understand Pakistani society without thinking about partition, which took place 70 years ago. That distinguishes Pakistan from other societies, yes? But it's a very important determination of this concept of society which can be analyzed at some abstract level. And all these determinations, which actually there are many of them, are equally important in Marx. So the question is, what is the dialectical movement back and forth between abstract and concrete. In normal sciences, by normal sciences I mean physics, chemistry, the non-Marxian, non-dialectical way. You don't talk about determinations, you talk about aspects. So, and then these aspects can be detached from the object of a study, and what will remain will be the abstract concept that you are going to study. For example, again, speaking of this microphone, instead of talking about the process of design, the process of making profit by producing and selling this microphone, the process of thinking about the idea of a microphone. I can detach from this microphone its weight, its size, its color, and then there will be an idea of microphone somehow, somewhere in my mind, but this is not the site of, this is a very different type of abstraction. Still it's an abstract idea, still it's a simplified idea, but in the second way of making abstraction, you pretty much ignore all these processes that interacted with each other and which eventually resulted in the production of a microphone. So another good example, which actually is in all of us, our pockets and maybe our hands, is iPhone or a mobile phone. So as we know, technology was developed by the military originally, the technology of the web, the technology of GPS. And there has been so many researches, so many processes of allocating budget to producing such technologies. And these processes are themselves the site of other processes. For example, Republicans and Democrats in the United States Senate, they negotiate with each other, they fight each other whether to allocate resources, fiscal resources on technology or on coronavirus, whether to help the poor or whether to invest money in space technology. So all these processes interact, and because there are many, many of them, it seems that there is no definitive final answer, which makes the analysis both a little bit scary and at the same time very interesting. And again, going back to the main line that we were expected to discuss, I'm not a Marxist. One reason, and that is our reading, why Marx argued that he was not a Marxist, because of these many determinations, that each of them, as a factor, is the site of many, many other determinations. So you are dealing with, as Dr. Harris said, with a web of very complex processes that in a very ceaseless way always interact with each other and determine each other. And the process moves forward as a whole, as a totality. So in such very complex web of factors, processes, how can you make a final judgment about what is best, for example, what is the best alternative to capitalism, what is the best alternative, what is the final solution to coronavirus? Well, of course, a medicine may do the job, but you cannot ignore, for example, the role of income. Who can afford that medicine? Who can access to that medicine? Who should decide who should be able to buy? Who should decide who should be able to sell? So these are questions, these are aspects of a very simple phenomenon like a medicine for the virus or a microphone or a mobile phone on an iPhone, which seems to be a single and singular object, but as a matter of fact, they are not. They are the site of many, many determinations, and these determinations, in a very dialectical way, constantly interact with each other and co-determine each other, in the sense that, for example, going back to the example of iPhone, which is, or a mobile phone, which all of us have. Of course, there must be a culture of carrying iPhone. It's part of our identity these days, yes? In Karachi, I don't own a car, so I can't live without a mobile phone because I need to book an Uber, yes? So there is a transportation aspect to it. And then you need to have connection to 3G or 4G or 5G. So there is an infrastructure aspect. And who is supposed to provide us with the infrastructure? Private sector, public sector, foreigners, locals, at what price, yes, for whom? And when you take all these questions into account, you realize that you are dealing with a picture which...
The writings of Marx, without really understanding the intellectual process, the process of analysis, the dialectic that was at work in those writings, and they had sort of, rigidified, created and like precisely like one term that will come up in a poor abstraction, like out of Marx, where, so it's doctrinal, it's prescriptive, it's static, right? Like Marx's philosophy, Marx's thought was all about dynamism. It was all about change. And when one actually reads the writings of Marx, which is what we try to do when we teach our courses, which we teach Marx in original text, you find that you pick up a text of Marx and you come away with very little by way of definition, by way of prescription. Right? It's so, like for instance, to give you an example of a book of Marx, which he wrote in the context of what is known as the ascension to power of Louis Bonaparte in 1883. So, like France, after going through some revolutionary activity, came to a stage where Louis Bonaparte, who was, like, the term Bonapartist, comes out of, like, Louis Bonaparte came on the back of the military in France and took on power, like highly, anti-democracy, like anti-people sort of, policies, has all kinds of, the ascension to power of Louis Bonaparte has all kinds of resonances for our time when we think about populist politics. Anti-people, populist politics in the present, but people favored him and they put him in power. Marx wrote this book called The 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, and that was the first book we taught this semester, this spring, before it was abruptly disrupted by the corona virus. So when we gave our students that book, some of our students were very frustrated. They were saying that, okay, we've read this book, this big ponderous text, and like Marx doesn't tell us anything about class. Like, what is class? Like, is there a definition of class that appears? But what is really going on in that book is that Marx is giving you a strategy to analyze class, to think about class, to examine, to interrogate, to raise the question of class, but no easy definitions, no prescriptions. Right? Like, no, if you're looking for sort of, definite account that class is this or class is that, it's not forthcoming. Rather, you have a whole sort of, framework of analysis which comes into play. Like, the other thing is that when one reads Marx, because Marx, especially in relation to Marxism, one of the assumptions that go around was that, well, Marx hated capitalism, and he loved communism, and that he had nothing to do with the capitalist political economy and so on and so forth. But now when we read Marx, and that includes the text that has been given to you as well as the Capital, you find that Marx is a thinker of what in the description also we describe as comparative hermeneutics. He's constantly, instead of disregarding the writings of the mainstream political economy of his time, Marx is in a constant sort of process of engagement, of dialectic, of dialogue with these thinkers, right? So it's not at all a rejection, right? Because in fact, Marx is a thinker who precisely engages ideas which are in opposition to what his own position might be on a given matter. So on the one hand, here we have a process of thinking which is open, which is what precisely makes it dialectical, non-prescriptive, non-dogmatic, right? Like this was a thinker who, like most of his works are incomplete, the works that he himself wrote as well as the works he authored with Engels. But then this was also a thinker who's in a constant process of comparative analysis, of dialogue with all kinds of people, people, some of whom he might agree with, others that he would just deeply disagree. But the process of dialogue, of this dialectical engagement is constant, it's ongoing, right? So that also goes counter to some of the prevailing assumptions about the writings of Marx, which were even prominent in Marx's own time, and we see it happening in our time also, where instead of engagement with opposing ideas, there is rejection. There is right. So you want to add to some of this?
Thank you very much. Actually, right before coming to this talk, as usual, I went to my Facebook and noticed that a student of mine who passed away because of cancer translated a book, and his parents actually published the book after his death. So it was very heartbreaking, but it was very timely because in a very peculiar way, because of the comments that people have posted to Facebook on the page for the cover page of the book. So the book is about participatory economics. It's a new way of thinking about socialism and setting up a society which is more fair, more just, more participatory, more humane. And one of the comments was very interesting. A person who I didn't know, and actually I wanted to show the picture, but because it is live, I decided not to do it, argued that, well, first we were supposed to establish a communist society, then we were supposed to establish a socialist society, now we are supposed to establish a participatory economics, which he wanted to say that this is not exactly what Marx meant, because Marx was all for a communist society. So I thought it was very relevant to our discussion today, because if Marx was not a Marxist, so how can we make the final judgment about what exactly a post-capitalist society is supposed to look like? Because it's an ongoing discussion. Our reading is that there is no definitive answer because of the reasons we are going to discuss, because of the mode of analysis Marx presents and invites us to learn about that mode of analysis and use it in our social thinking, in our thinking about a society, making life better, making a more just, a fairer society. So going back to the question gentleman asked about, was there a Marxism when Marx was alive? One can look at this question from multiple perspectives, but one perspective is that it seems that Marx wanted to actually raise a point, and that is, well, the theory I'm presenting can be used in a very dogmatic way. Because I'm criticizing capitalism, I'm promising a better and a possible better world. I'm inviting you to get engaged in political activism. And he himself, as you know, was an activist, was a journalist, so he came from a multiplicity of backgrounds. But despite all of these, it seems that what Marx is trying to say is that there cannot be a one and only one way of reading this very, very interesting character who has produced 5,500 pages. So our reading is, well, the answer is no, but we have to elaborate as we move on why the answer is no. Because exactly of the way he theorizes social concepts. he's providing us with a very unique way of thinking about society and culture and mode of production and capitalism and the way to move forward.
Right, so now you see, he is in political economy, I'm in philosophy, so we teach together precisely carrying forward what you might understand as the spirit in Marx, which is the spirit of dialogue. Now there are various texts of Marx that one can go to in order to understand the meaning of this line, right? That first and last, I'm not a Marxist, because to understand the meaning of this line, one has to be able to say something with some clarity on what exactly is going on in the writings of Marx. And the most important dimension or aspect of the writings of Marx is this way of thinking, like the mode of analysis which he's presenting, rather than prescription, definition, dogma, a definite set of propositions, right, per se. So the text that we chose, in order to articulate what might be going on in Marx, is that section that we gave you to read from the Grundrisse, called The Method of Political Economy. And that's one of the few occasions within the writings of Marx where Marx, instead of showing or putting his method in practice, is actually outlining what the method is. So that 7-8 page text that you have is very important. So what we are going to do now is to have a bit of discussion on what abstraction is. Like, what is this analysis of abstraction? Delineate some of the main features of this analysis, and then look at passages in the text that was given to you, and then also zoom out, look at other passages from within the Grundrisse. So first of all,
then you have a new dialectical relation between concrete and abstract, yes? Because now these workers have new set of ideas, new set of notions and concepts in their minds, and they are going to fight for a better condition of work, for a better life. And of course there will be some backlash, and then you have to wait for the history to take its path. And again, I would recommend that there are so many actually movies and so many TV series produced in the United States and the rest of the world, which actually are trying to sell the exact idea I just tried to explain. That it's about work is something valuable. Try your best, and there is a promise that if you try your best, you can climb the ladder of social mobility, and the sky is the limit. So there is a huge culture actually surrounding this notion. So you see that you have culture, you have politics, you have unions, you have labor, you have capital, you have the state, you have representation, you have technology, yes? And I would add religion as a factor. And you have this web of very complex social relations. And the only way to understand this very complex web of social relations is to take a distance and then try to understand it from abstract perspective, and then go back and try to change it.
Yes, and certainly, and to say that the concrete is complex is not to say that it cannot be understood. It can be understood, but there is no final, but it can be understood, like provided one is methodical about it. Yes.
Sir,
yes,
in the interest of time, since this session was also live, we have a lot of questions on our live feed as well. They are not present here, so we'll take some questions from the live feed, and then we'll move back here. 2 questions from here and 1 question from the live feed, or 2 questions here.
Sure.
So the first question is, do you believe that the future will see a marriage between the social and the private sphere, with basic necessities such as education, healthcare, transport, infrastructure socialized, and the rest privatized?
So I don't think it's just about future, it's also about now and past. So private and social, of course, interact with each other and depend upon each other. So if I understand the question correctly.
I think it's just talking about the comparison between the social and the private sphere. Like in the near future, do you see that all the basic necessities will be socialized while the rest will be privatized to a very individualistic level?
I mean, I think the reference might be to a particular kind of social struggle, like no necessity. Again, it depends on how these various tendencies might collide. But we need to know more about the way in which these terms are being used, right? Like, are you talking about the private and public in terms of political liberalism, or are you talking about privatization and so on? So no guarantees, because these days, certainly, given the kind of crisis that we have with the coronavirus, there are thinkers, there are theorists, some theorists, I think not very good theorists, who are saying that this might be the final crisis of capitalism, because you've reached the final sort of breaking point, after which the system has to change. No such guarantees. It's like it's an ongoing like, let's say, tussle. Yes.
Maybe my question is also related to what you earlier answered. Which system is better, capitalism or Marxism? Are they both the same? Because you said Marxism is dynamism, so it's dynamic. They can be same.
Actually, okay, so that's an interesting question. Because our talk is precisely, like the very subtitle of the talk, where Marx is saying, I'm not a Marxist, right? So it's not about comparing Marxism with capitalism at all. Actually, it's about, like understanding what the analysis in Marx, what the dialectic in Marx, and in particular this dialectic of the abstract and concrete might be, right? It's not, so I mean, it's a good question that you've asked, but I'm not sure that was really the scope of our discussion per se. So that's not, in fact, like, we haven't made any claims about capitalism per se, because I mean, in fact, I would like to clarify and point out here that Marx never wrote about capitalism. He wrote about capital. But what he does is that he presents an analysis of capital, where the analysis moves at varying levels of abstraction. Even in this phenomena, in this form of capital, which appears in concrete, which manifests concrete.
All right. So, as we have now run out of time, anyone who would like to ask questions, you can ask them, I think, after the session. I would like to thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much for taking the time and for being here in this very, it has been a very stressful week for us as well at the university, and we we made a commitment to come here, and we but we've also been under quite a bit of stress, and I'm sure all of you have also been stressed out over what's happening around us. So yeah, we are certainly around. We are going to be here for some time to answer your questions, and in particular, we would be very encouraged if you ask us questions also about what to read. Okay, so what's the next step once we are here?